Hello there, FFTCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and you're watching episode 30 of Rules Roundup. That's right, Rules Roundup has hit its dirty 30 this time. And I guess to celebrate, we're going to be supersized today. We're going to have a whopping 20 questions of rules questions today for Rules Roundup. So we're kind of playing 20 questions, I guess, to celebrate the dirty 30. So yeah, gonna have some extra rules goodness to throw at you. I do want to say right off the bat, I want to apologize for not being as consistent with getting things out there. I came back from a break in February and was kind of, things were picking up steam. We were doing good again. I was getting pretty regular releases. And then a whole bunch of stuff hit all at the same time in my personal life, along with just stuff around the house and everything. Part of my house got accidentally flooded, so yeah, everybody's fine and things are mostly fine, but it's just been a lot of disruption. So just apologies for having kind of another unintended break in there. I did luckily get out the Opus 28 fact checking video a couple weeks ago. If you haven't checked that out, so you can go look at that. But I'm hoping to get back to some more consistency here. So yeah, apologies if you've been missing having some regular content from me. Also, I have to bring up that I want to thank you all because I just recently passed 300 subscribers on the YouTube channel, which is awesome. I am incredibly humbled and happy to pass that threshold. When I checked earlier today, it was at 305, so I'm safely in that threshold where now that I've said I'm past 300, can't just have like one person decide to unsubscribe, so I'm back down to 299. I'm a little bit of a buffer there, but I did get past 300, which is something that I was creeping towards for a long time. So yeah, just thank you to all 305 of you who are subscribed, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can still hit that subscribe button. If you're already subscribed, I guess you can technically hit the unsubscribe button and then subscribe again, and I'll get like notifications for it. But you don't have to. If you're already subscribed, you're all good. But those of you who are not subscribed, you want to up the net, you want to be part of the team here. But anyway, so yeah, past 300, which is exciting, and I'm very thankful and very happy about that. We are in the beginning of organized play season. We had our first. Not only the first Materia Cup in Raleigh a couple weeks ago, but we also last weekend had the first round of local qualifiers. So we have kicked off the season. Things are exciting. People are playing games, very meaningful games, trying to get those Nats invites. So yeah, this is where all the rules stuff is very, very important, both for you to understand and for people to have the right answers and all that. We want to make sure the game is being played properly. So with all that out of the way, I've rambled for 3 minutes now, and we need to get into rules question stuff. Oh, I didn't do the normal spiel. Just in case this is the first time you've ever watched Rules Roundup, probably not, but just in case, this, of course, is the series where I go over rules questions that were asked in the unofficial global FFTCG Discord. That's right, that one right there. In the rules section there, I take those questions and I answer them for you here, both to explain what the answer is, but also kind of how we get to that answer, the rules behind it, and hopefully give you a better understanding of things, or just test your own knowledge to see if you knew not only the answer, but kind of why we get there. Because the more that everybody out there has this sort of rules knowledge, the better better off we all are, right? Just having kind of more rules knowledge out there in the community is a good thing, in my opinion. All right, now I'm done rambling, and we can get to our first question. All right. Someone asked me a question about a target validity. So we need to know if you cast a card before paying the cost, or you pay the cost before playing the card. That changed a lot of things. For example, Ramza and Kurilla. If you pay the cost before casting Ramza, when Ramza trigger, he see Kurilla in the break zone, so he can play it because it's a valid target at this time. But if the cost is play after, Ramza cannot play Kurilla because he trigger before the Kurilla is put in the break zone. I get the feeling from reading this question that the person who wrote it, maybe English is not their first language, but you know what? They're better at English than I am in just about every other language that I've tried. I don't think I could be as articulate there. So I do, again, like to leave the questions exactly the way that they're written, other than maybe a little bit of capitalization and punctuation here and there. But yeah, so I read it the way that they wrote it. But what they're getting to here, what their point is as you can see there in the gold lettering, the crux of this is, do you cast a card before paying the cost, or do you pay the cost before playing the card? And I assume most of you know what Ramza and Corilla do. Actually, Corilla's not really important. We just need to know what Ramza does. He has the auto ability that says, when Ramza enters the field, choose one job knight of cost 5 or less in your break zone and play it onto the field. So obviously we need to have a knight already in the break zone when his auto ability triggers so that we can choose it, because that's the point where we need to have the valid target. And that's where this whole question comes into play of the paying versus playing part of this. And if you've followed me long enough, or you know me talk to me in person, you probably know that one of my pet peeves and one of my like hills to die on in this game is the fact that most people don't pay for things in the correct sequence in this game. People are very used to other card games where you generate the resource first and then you spend it, as opposed to this game where you declare what you're doing first, you determine what the cost is, and then you pay the cost at that point in time. So that's very important right here, that the way we're supposed to do it is you're supposed to, like, the sequence would be that you would reveal Ramza from your hand, say that you're casting him, you would then pay the cost, presumably 7 fire CP here, or 7 CP, including at least 1 fire. And then you would pay that cost. After you've done that, you've now completed the casting. Ramza enters the field, and then his auto ability will trigger there. Now, in this case, it's not a huge deal whether people pay in the correct sequence or not, because the either way, his auto ability is not going to trigger until after he's cast. So whether you paid the cost first and then said that you're doing it, or the other way around, like, either way, the card's gonna be in the break zone. But I had to do my little spiel there about it, because yeah, his auto ability will trigger after you've finished paying the cost either way, and the casting is complete. And at that point, Corilla is already in the break zone. Where that gets murkier, the sequencing of paying the cost, is for summons. And the reason for that is because summons don't have that extra step of that they finish casting and then you have to choose the targets, because Ramza's auto ability doesn't trigger in the first place until after you finish the whole casting process. For a summon, you have to choose your targets before you finish the casting process, which means you do it before you've paid for the card. So that's the distinction there. But overall, it's worth knowing that you need to declare what you're casting first and then pay for it. In addition to the reasons I mentioned before, it's also very important for just making sure both players are very clear on what the payment is and making sure that it was done correctly. One of the things that's a part of my pet peeve about this is that people will discard a bunch of cards, and they might even along the way change how they're paying for something. Like, they dulled and they discard a couple of cards, but then they like change, I'm going to dull this, I'm going to take this back and discard this instead, And if the opponent doesn't know what card is coming, they don't know if you're paying correctly yet, right? They're maybe not tracking, like, did you pay with a fire CP? Did you pay with a earth CP? Whatever you're supposed to do. Versus when you announce ahead of time, I am doing this card and now I'm going to pay for it. Now I know, okay, you're playing an earth summon. I'm going to make sure that part of your payment includes earth. But if I don't know what it is yet, maybe I'm not looking out to make sure that you paid with earth, and then you just slam it down after you've paid the cost, and maybe I didn't actually track that. So it's about making sure the game is both done correctly, but also done in a way that minimizes possible errors like that. Anyway, moving along. Does Volker see himself go to break zone to deal 4k? I believe he does, but it never hurts to double check, because I'm also checking for the new fire Cecil as well. All right, so Volker has this auto ability. It's kind of hidden halfway down because his other auto ability is the big one. But it says, when a job warrior or a card name warrior you control is put from the field into the break zone, choose one forward opponent controls, deal at 4,000 damage. So the trigger event for this is when a job warrior or card name warrior you control is put from the field into the break zone. And whenever we have these broader auto abilities that trigger from something going into the break zone, this question comes up because it people get kind of lost in the weeds of does he see himself go in there, which is how this was phrased here, right? And the thing that I was come back with to remind people is that we have no shortage of characters in this game who have an auto ability that triggers when that specific character goes into the break zone. So if Volker was worded as when Volker is put from the field in the break zone, choose one forward opponent controls, deal it 4,000 damage. If it was worded like that, nobody would be confused by it because they'd be like, oh, well, yeah, obviously he sees himself. The ability says on it when Volker is put into the break zone. Cool. This is that same exact concept. It's just that it covers a bigger umbrella than just Volker, right? So the way I worded a second ago, it's specific to only when Volker is put from the field in the break zone. But we understand in that situation that even though he's the one moving, the auto is triggering it, seeing himself move, right? This has to do also, by the way, to kind of further explain, with zone movement triggers, which is that the vast majority of the time, zone movement triggers, they trigger in the moment right before the card actually moves to the new zone. It's when you've basically locked in that the card's definitely going to that zone, but before it actually leaves the zone that it's in. So that's kind of the nitty gritty rules part of it. But like I said, with Volker, his ability, it says when a job warrior or card name warrior you control is put from the field in the break zone, it's a bigger umbrella. It covers not just him, but other warriors as well. But he's part of that, right? Because he has the job warrior. I mean, unless you somehow removed his job and then put him in the break zone, then he wouldn't be a job warrior. But it's the same idea. So he will see himself because it's a job warrior. He is a job warrior in the same way as if it was worded specifically for his name. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's the way to think of it, is that even though it's not calling him out by name, it's actually the same idea. It's just that it covers more than just himself. All right. Can I choose 2 times the same effect out of 4 the card gives me accessibility to, or must they be 2 different effects? So all we need to know about Cloud here is the first part, which says when Cloud enters the field, select up to 2 of the 4 following actions. Doesn't matter what the actions are. This question just has to do with selecting up to 2 of the 4 following actions. The answer is that you can't select the same one twice. That's just by default. You're not allowed to select the same one twice. If you are allowed to select one twice, the card will explicitly tell you so. The Dark Arden card is one that lets the player, in that case it's the opponent, lets the player select the same action more than once, but it also specifies on the card. And again, that's what cards do all the time, is that they will break the rules by telling you to do the effect on it, which is in itself circumventing the rules because the effect tells you to do it. But the default is that you must select different ones if you're selecting, in this case, 2. So you can't just double up the same thing twice. So broadly, like 99.9% of the auto abilities that you run into that have this type of wording where you select from multiple actions and you get to select more than one action, you can't select the same thing more than once. So just keep that in mind. All right, would White Mage trigger off of discards due to playing Yang? All right, this one here, we have the Yang, who's from Opus 28, newer card. I'll read him first, I guess. So his auto ability here says, when Yang enters the field, you may discard any number of cards. When you do so, choose up to the same number of forwards opponent controls that said discarded cards and deal 9,000 damage. We actually don't really care what the effect does. It's mostly just the fact that the first part of it says you may discard any number of cards. Now, White Mage here says, when you discard one or more cards due to summons or abilities, draw 1 card. This effect will trigger only during your opponent's turn. I'm going to come back to the nuance there with White Mage in a second, but the way that we determine whether White Mage triggers just generally is whether the effect of a card causes you to discard. How do we tell if it's the effect? Well, if it's an auto ability, everything's part of the effect. So that part is nice and simple. But we do have, we have to draw the distinction where when we have action and special abilities, which they have a cost that's also written on the card, costs are not considered part of the effect of the ability. So, for example, there's the Unalesca backup that has an ability that you dull Unalesca and you discard a card from your hand as the cost, and then it does its thing. In that case, discarding a card would not trigger White Mage for multiple reasons, but the one I'm going to stick with here is that it wouldn't, because the discard is part of the cost. So White Mage is looking at, what does the effect of the card do? Does the effect cause you to discard? And a lot of times the opponent's cards will, especially if they're playing ice, will cause you to discard. So that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, it'll trigger White Mage. In this case, it's Yang. So you're controlling both Yang and White Mage. And Yang says you may discard a number of cards. And even though it's your own card, and even though it's optional to discard, it is an effect. Like, part of the effect is having you discard. It might seem like it's a cost, by the way. I should point that out, because in your head, it's easy to come to the conclusion. You go, okay, well, the amount of 9,000, bombs that I get to throw out there is based off of how many I discard. So it probably feels to you like a cost. It feels like, okay, the cost is I discard a card, and the effect is I deal 9,000 or something. But the way that the rules define costs, it's not, discarding in this case is not a cost, right? One thing does lead to the next one, but it's not a cost. A cost is specifically either the CP cost up there in the top left corner, or in the case of special and action abilities, it's the what's before the colon, right? Because it's always written in the syntax of cost : effect. So the cost is written there before the colon. But that's what, or if there's something in the text that tells you to do something as a cost. If it says you may discard a card as an extra cost, okay, then we've defined it as being a cost. But anything else, not a cost. So this one, it's not telling you that the discards are part of a cost, so it's not part of a cost. So because of that, that means it will trigger White Mage. Now, I told you I'd come back to the White Mage nuance here, and the White Mage nuance is that, in case you didn't catch it the first time I read it, it says this effect will trigger only during your opponent's turn. So very important for how this all works if you're trying to combine these two, is it's only going to trigger during your opponent's turn. Most of the time, if we're casting a card, or we have a forward, or a character rather, entering the field, it's usually on our turn. So I do feel the need to point out, if you cast Yang on your turn and you control White Mage, it doesn't matter if you discard any cards or how many you discard, you are not going to trigger White Mage. Why? Because it's your turn, and White Mage will only trigger during the opponent's turn. That being said, there are ways, of course, for Yang to enter the field during the opponent's turn. Maybe you're playing Opus 1 Tama and being an OG like that. Maybe you just use the Helena special during your opponent's turn to play Yang to the field. Maybe you're casting 7 CP Phoenix Summon and choosing Yang to play to the field. There are ways to get him out there on the opponent's turn, so you'll still trigger White Mage. But it's worth pointing out that this combo that the person's asking about will only work if Yang's entering during the opponent's turn. Next up, can Apururu be used to pay the ice for Prish's warp cost, or no, because he says the cost to cast? So Apururu has this ability. It says, while paying the cost to cast a category 11 card, if Apururu is on the field, Apururu can produce CP of any element. And as the question, the person asking the question phrased it, it does say in Apururu that it's the cost to cast is where you can do any CP. So paying for abilities is not something that Apururu gets to generate other elements of CP for. And yeah, Prish is here just to kind of show that, yes, she has warp, and that's what we're asking about. So just remember that warp is an ability, right? And it's an ability that causes the character to get played to the field, but at no part of the warp process are you casting the card. So when you're removing it from the game, paying the warp cost, you're not casting it. When the warp counters come off and eventually Prish goes to the field, that's not casting either. There's no casting anywhere in the warp process. It's just an ability it's an alternative way to cause the card to get played to the field, but it is not casting at all. And because of that, Apururu is not helpful, because Apururu is only going to be able to start dulling further CP if he's paying for the cost to cast. So if you want to use him to pay the ice to cast Prish normally, great, go ahead and do that. If you're trying to do the warp, not going to be helpful. So. All right, me and my friend are playing our first game, and they played this card. We don't really get when you would want to use it. Thanks for the help. I assume with Ignis, we're talking about the action ability because the field ability is just that it is what it is. But the action ability is to dull 2 active job retainer and choose one ability that is choosing a card named Noctis or job retainer you control and cancel its effect. Now they did say this is them playing their first game, and so I mean, congrats to them playing the first game. I hope they got hooked on it after that point, like the rest of us did. And especially if you come to this game not having played other card games or like with very little experience playing other card games, there are some things that are just not obvious. So I know that for anybody, if you play this game for more than a few minutes, you're probably like, duh, this is an obvious question. But I think it's always worth being welcoming and understanding to people who this might be their first TCG ever because they're Final Fantasy fans, but they haven't played TCGs before. So to answer the question though, the effect of Ignis's ability is to choose an ability that's choosing one of them and cancel it. And basically that's just because there's lots of effects in this game that your opponent will do to your cards that are you'd prefer they didn't happen. They're bad effects, right? They break your cards, they dull your cards, they freeze your cards, they remove their abilities, and so on and so forth. There's like a lot of the game is based around doing things to the opponent's cards to disable them or remove them. And so for that reason, this ability is useful to be able to just cancel those effects, make your opponent who spent resources on trying to do it have spent those resources without getting the benefit of it. So yeah, you would want to use it when an ability or a summon's on the stack that is choosing one of those characters, and you're like, no, I don't want that to happen. So that's the answer. All right, hello, I'm playing VV while Lehftia is in field. In this interaction, I get to divide 7,000 plus 2,000 damage, or I divide 7,000 and each target gets the division plus 2,000. Thank you. All right, what's going on here to make the question a little clearer? So VV has the auto ability. It says when VV enters the field, choose any number of forwards the opponent controls, divide 7,000 damage among them as you like. If you control a category 9 forward other than VV, divide 10,000 among them instead, and units must be 1,000. And then Lehftia has a field ability. It says if your fire summon or a fire character you control deals damage to a forward, the damage increases by 2,000 instead. So VV, you get to split the 7,000 among multiple forwards if you want to, and Lehftia has this replacement effect, and the replacement effect is going to take whatever the amount of damage is and increase it by 2,000. So they're wondering when and how that replacement effect gets applied here, because if VV is splitting the damage among two things, they're asking, do we take the 7,000 and then add 2,000 to it and then divide that up, or do we divide it up and then when we're actually resolving the damage, do we then add 2,000 to each? And it's a great question because this is something that's maybe not obvious to people, especially because replacement effects can be very confusing. People have a hard time with them sometimes. So what you're going to do is you are going to divide just the 7,000, right? Because the damage is not being dealt yet, so we're not replacing anything yet, right? The replacement effect for Lehftia is happening when the damage is being dealt, and that's not going to happen until the ability itself resolves. So when we're dividing the damage, that's one of the things that happens when the auto ability gets put onto the stack. And so at that point in time, the damage isn't being dealt, but we do have to decide how we're dividing the 7,000. So if they have two forwards, you're dividing this, maybe go 3,000 here, 4,000 there. And then what's going to happen is that when you go to resolve the damage, you go, okay, well, we're going to deal 3,000 damage here. And then right before the damage gets dealt, that's when Lehftia kicks in and you go, oh, there's a replacement effect. We're going to deal 3,000 damage, but now it's being increased by 2,000 instead. And now it's going to be 5,000 damage. And then we go to deal the 4,000 damage over here. And it's like, okay, well, 4,000 is about to be dealt, but we have the replacement effect. And so that 4,000 is now bumped up to 6,000. So you do get the max benefit here, essentially, which is that Lehftia will add 2,000 to each of the targets, right? Technically, if they had 7 targets and you wanted to go 1K, 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 then when you resolve it, all of them will have 3K dealt to them. if that was somehow helpful to you. Maybe they're playing Vikings. I don't know. Um, but yeah, so Lehftia is not going to replace until the damage is being dealt, and we're looking at it on an individual basis every time the forward is being dealt damage. So it's not when the ability deals damage, if that makes sense, but it's when the damage is being received or dealt. That's when we're going to replace that. All right, is Umaro considered like Jekt, just one-sided fight, or is it considered ability damage? This is important because of Yuzuki's text. So I'm going to read Yuzuki here first. She's got an ability that says, if a fire forward you control is dealt damage by your opponent's abilities, the damage becomes 0 instead. So damage that comes from where the source is an ability is going to become 0 as a replacement effect on Yuzuki. And this, where the distinction is important is because we have some abilities. I don't have one up here on the screen right now, but we have some abilities. They don't have an official name, but they cause either a forward to directly deal damage to another forward, or they cause two forwards to directly deal damage to each other, in a way that the source of the damage is the forward dealing it, but it's not the ability dealing it, if that makes sense. Even though it's not an official name, and I'm very much against coming up with unofficial names for things, that people do like to call this fight damage. I get it. It makes sense. I think in Magic, they actually refer to it as fight damage or fight effect specifically. I guess I won't get into why I don't like it being called fight damage, but the term that I prefer, if we have to give it one, is to call it command damage. The reason being is that the effect is commanding the forward to deal the damage. Why is that important, and how is that different from an ability dealing the damage? Well, since we have Umaro here, I'm going to use a snowball metaphor, which is it's just fun. So normally, when we have a character whose ability deals damage, we just had a question about Vivi a second ago, and his auto ability dealt damage directly. The source of the damage was definitely the ability. When we have an ability like that, what happens is the ability gets put on the stack, and then when it resolves, it deals the damage. But the way we can visualize that or think about it is that it's like when the ability went on the stack, Vivi threw a snowball. So it went onto the stack, Vivi threw the snowball, and when we resolve the ability, that's the snowball hitting the target. Okay? So that's how like abilities that deal damage themselves, like you can visualize it like that. Command damage abilities, or not command damage, I don't want to call it that because again it's an unofficial term, but like effects that command a forward to deal damage, let's go with that. They are different in terms of that when they go on the stack, that is not the snowball having been thrown and we're waiting for it to land. That is, think of it like that's me yelling out, "Hey Vivi, throw a snowball," right? So I've yelled it out. I've commanded Vivi to throw a snowball. He has not yet thrown the snowball. All that's happened is I've commanded him to do it. And then when the ability resolves, then Vivi goes, "Oh, okay." He grabs a snowball and he throws it. So you see how there's a difference there, because in the first type of ability, where the ability is the one causing the damage, the snowball was thrown, we're waiting for it to land and hit its target. In the second one, the snowball didn't get thrown until we were resolving it. All that happened was the command going out, "Vivi, throw a snowball." Okay. So why is this important? It's because well, there's multiple reasons, but a big one is that how they resolve is different based off of whether or not the forward that's going to be doing the damage is on the field when it resolves. In the first case there, where Vivi threw the snowball, then what happens is that he threw the snowball, but now if he gets taken out before the ability resolves, the snowball's already in the air. It's going to land, like if the target's still there and valid and all that, it's going to land and deal damage whether or not Vivi's still around. In the second example I gave, if I say, "Hey Vivi, throw a snowball," and then something before resolution takes Vivi out at that point, then when I go to resolve it, he hasn't thrown the snowball yet, which means that if he was removed he's not going to throw the snowball now because he's gone, right? So he doesn't throw it until resolution. So if he's not there at resolution, it doesn't matter that I told him to throw the snowball. He ain't there. Okay. So that's one of the important distinctions there. It's not important for this one, but since we're talking about this, I just want to make sure that we're kind of clear, and it's just something that people get really caught up on a lot. So I figure it's worth going through the details. So how do we figure out which one of these Umaro is? How do we figure out if this is the ability causing the damage or if it's the forward causing the damage? Well, there's one thing that's a big clue, and if you haven't figured it out already, then I'll swing back to it later. But the way that they word them differently from each other is it's very nuanced. But if it's an ability that's dealing the damage, they will word it as you choose the target, whatever, and it'll say deal it damage equal to whatever forward it is, forward's power. So it'll say deal it damage equal to that power, which makes it, like, grammatically, it makes it sound like they're telling you to deal the damage, right? They're saying, hey, you, the player, deal that forward damage equal to Umaro's power, right? So that would be where the ability is dealing damage, and it sounds like they're telling you to do it, but the ability is the source of damage. If it's one of those like command effects, then it will phrase it as the forward deals damage equal to its power to the other forward. So it would say Umaro deals damage equal to his power to the other forward. So instead of it grammatically sounding like they're telling you to deal the damage, they're telling you, oh, by the way, the forward's dealing the damage, right? The thing that can be confusing about this is that in both cases, the source of the damage is still the forward. Like even with the first example I gave, like when it comes down to who gets credit, even though they kind of say, like, tell you deal the damage, the player, it's still the whoever's ability it is, that's the source of it. So that can be confusing. I know a lot of this is confusing, so apologies. I'm trying my best here to make it clear, but there's a lot of nuance to it. So yeah, basically what you're looking for to differentiate is if it says deal it damage equal to this forward's power, that is the ability is the source of the damage. It's considered ability damage. If it says the forward deals damage equal to its power to the other forward, then it's a command effect, and the source of the damage is the forward itself, not the forward's ability, but the forward itself. You can think of it like when I made the example before of telling Vivi, hey, Vivi, throw a snowball. Me saying Vivi, throw a snowball, I am not the source of the damage in that case, right? The source of the damage is Vivi throwing the snowball, but I'm not the source of the damage. So again, I'm trying to make these distinctions, but I hope they're landing. The last part of this that might be obvious by this point if you didn't pick it up yet is I did mention that for the effects that are commanding the forward deal damage, they must be on the field in order for that forward to deal the damage. Well, if we read Umaro's effect here, which I didn't actually read it yet, so I should have, but his ability is an action ability, and the cost is put Umaro into the break zone. The effect is choose one forward, deal it damage equal to Umaro's power. So knowing what the cost is, which is putting Umaro into the break zone, we already know ahead of time that Umaro is not going to be on the field when this resolves. He's going to be in the break zone. That's the cost. So that being the case, it's probably pretty clear that this is not a command effect, because Umaro in any situation is not going to be on the field to do the thing then, right? Like this, it doesn't work for me to say, Umaro, throw a snowball, because Umaro is never going to be on the field when this resolves to throw the snowball. So by definition, for this effect to actually work the way that it's intended, the snowball needs to be thrown before, or it needs to be thrown when we're putting it on the stack, essentially. So he's throwing the snowball and yeeting himself out to pay the cost of that snowball. So all of that explanation, all of that back and forth, just to say that this is ability damage, because this is the type where the snowball was thrown when it was being put onto the stack. And so that means that if we were to throw that snowball at Yuzuki, then it would be reduced to 0 because she's a fire forward. And so, yeah, the source of the damage is the ability, which is throwing the snowball. This question mentions Ject. I don't have them on the screen, but Ject is worded the other way around. It's not like Umaro. His effect says that you choose a forward the opponent controls, and then I believe it's a two-way thing. So it's Ject and the chosen forward deal damage equal to their power to each other. So again, it's grammatically, it's explaining to you, like, it doesn't tell you to deal the damage. It says, oh, they're dealing the damage to each other, right? So that's a command type situation where Ject enters the field and we tell Ject and the other one, hey, you two hit each other. And then when it resolves, they hit each other if they're still there. Anyway, that is the explainer on fight damage. Or not fight damage. Again, I don't want to use the term. That's the explainer on whether the source of the damage is the forward or the ability. Someday I'll get around to like making a more concise, easier to understand version of this, but it is not this day. All right, Spiritus. Playing the card allows the player to search for a dark forward, but does not provide the line that Spiritus can create CP of any element, such as Opus 1 Chaos. Would Spiritus tap for dark CP, or does he not tap for anything, as we cannot drop light or dark cards for CP? All right, first off, if you're playing the long-standing Rules Roundup drinking game, somebody mentioned magic terms here, so take a drink, I guess. But the question over here is, of course, what sort of CP can Spiritus generate, if any? And really, to answer this question, you just have to think of what the general rules are for generating CP, which is that any backup can dull itself to generate CP of any of the elements that backup is. So most of the time it's a single element, but yeah, it can generate the CP that matches its element. So in the case of Spiritus, it's correct to point out that it doesn't have the same effect that Opus 1 Chaos has, where it tells you that Chaos can dull for any CP. And so in lieu of that, that means that we are stuck with the default generic rules for a backup, which means that when you dull Spiritus to generate CP, you're going to generate dark CP. And I know people like to say, oh, dark and light CP, it's since we're talking about magic, it's like colorless mana, right? It doesn't do anything. And it's like, I would disagree with you there. I mean, people think of it that way because when you cast light and dark cards, they don't require you to use CP that matches them. So it feels like anything that you use to pay for a light or dark card, doesn't matter what element it is. So it's kind of like it's all colorless or something like that. But I do want to stress the idea that it is technically dark CP. Why is that important? Because there are some effects that care about how many different types of CP you use to pay the cost for it. The ones that come to mind right away is there's the Opus, I want to say 8 or so, maybe it's 6. I think it's Opus 6 Cactuar summon that it deals 4,000 damage to the target for each different CP used to pay for it. So if you dull Spiritus to help pay for that Cactuar summon, that's dark CP. That is one element. That's going to be 4,000 right there. So if you use dark and you use earth, two different elements. Similarly, if you had some sort of weird way if you had Chaos and Spiritus on the field at the same time, and you dulled Spiritus to generate dark, and you dulled Chaos to generate light CP, to then cast that Cactuar, and you discarded an Earth card or something, you would have 3 CP. Now 3 different elements in there. I should say rather, you'd have 3 different elements within that CP, so you'd deal 12,000 damage. Or there's the Wind Tyro that has a search effect based off of if you that's if you control different characters. I think Varus is the card I'm thinking of, the ice backup that lets you search for any card if you paid for it by using 3 different elements. So again, dark CP important there because it is an element. So it's going to count for that. So yeah, Spiritus will dull to generate dark CP, and we don't have to worry about the fact that we're not allowed to discard light or dark cards to generate CP. That's a whole different rule. But the backups, light and dark backups, they follow the same rules as everything else. It's just that dark and light CP are usually not as helpful, just because they won't help you to match the CPs, the element CP that you need for other stuff. All right. Estinian versus Estinian versus Lightning. It says, hi, good night. That's a strange way to start things off, but hi, good night. When Estinian attack and Lightning enter due to its ability and blocks, how the interacting works. All right, what they're asking about is that we've got Estinian attacks and then Lightning blocks it. How are we going to resolve this? So Estinian has an auto ability. It says, when Estinian is blocked, break the blocking forward. Cool. Lightning has an auto ability that says, when Lightning blocks or is blocked, choose one attacking or blocking forward opponent controls, remove it from the game, and return Lightning to its owner's hand. So the situation here, Estinian attacks, Lightning declares the block, and we're going to trigger both these auto abilities at the same time, right? Because Estinian's trigger event is when he's blocked. So Lightning declaring the block will trigger Estinian, and Lightning's trigger event is when Lightning blocks or is blocked. So the same exact event, which is Lightning declaring the block, is going to trigger both their auto abilities. Both their auto abilities are going to be put onto the stack. Given that the Estinian is attacking, that means it is the Estinian player's turn. So, of course, the rules here is that when we have multiple auto abilities being put onto the stack at the same time, first the turn player puts all their auto abilities on the stack in whatever order they like, and then the non-turn player puts all of the auto abilities that they control onto the stack in whatever order they like. So because of this, Estinian's ability is going to end up on the stack first. It's the turn player's first. So when Estinian is attacking, it's Estinian player's turn. That goes on the stack first. And then the Lightning player, Lightning's auto ability is going to go on top. Then we resolve it from top down. So Lightning's is going to resolve first. Now hers says the effect itself, once it's resolving, says to remove it, being the forward that is being blocked, remove it from the game and return Lightning to its owner's hand. So when we resolve this, we're going to remove Estinian from the game and we're going to return Lightning to the Lightning player's hand. Then we have to resolve the Estinian ability. The Estinian ability says to break the blocking forward. For multiple reasons, this is now not going to resolve. One is that there's no longer a blocking forward. There's actually neither of the forwards are there anymore that were involved with this. But yeah, Lightning's gone. And even if it had chosen Lightning, this doesn't, but even if it had chosen Lightning, Lightning left the field, which means that she's not there for this ability to find, to do anything to. So it doesn't work out well for the Estinian player, unfortunately. Estinian gets removed from the game and Lightning just, jumped back to hand. And, that's how it resolves. I saw there was a Helena asking about alternate costs about Joom and the Warriors of the Crystals. Would it have the same result for crystals like Bart's? And if so, does that mean the Warriors of the Crystals could also choose to avoid paying a crystal and just play by paying for free, like the 1 CP plus crystal alternate payment of Rydia? All right, there's another one where the kind of the way the question is worded is a little bit awkward, but I think I get the overall gist of what they're asking. Helena Leonis has an ability that I don't need to read all of it, but the end result is that it allows you to cast a card that gets revealed, and it reduces the cost by 2. It says the cost required to cast it is reduced by 2. So what they're asking about here is that these Warriors of the Crystal, they have, most of them have this alternate cost. You can see on Rydia, it says you can pay 1 CP and a crystal instead of paying the CP cost to cast Rydia. So what this person is asking is, if we're paying the alternate cost for Rydia, which is 1 and a crystal, but Helena with her ability has reduced the cost of the card by 2. We're assuming that Rydia was the card flipped over by Helena here. They're saying, can we just cast the Rydia for nothing at that point because we reduced it by 2? They're saying you just play, because the question here is just play by paying for free, like the alternate payment there. So the answer is no. We can't just kind of make it all free, because whenever we have the cost reduced by a number, like Helena's effect, or like the ice wind Sid Haze, or the wind Grahatia, all these cards that tell you to change the cost, either raising or lowering. We're referring to the CP cost specifically. There can be other costs. In the case of this alternate cost here, we have a crystal. There's sometimes a summon might have an alternate cost, or sorry, not alternate, an extra cost to it. There's the Titan summon that as part of the cost, you can discard a card from your hand. So there's things that can be part of the cost that are not CP, but whenever we have these numbers that are being reduced, like we're talking specifically about the number, then we're just referring to the CP cost. So if you flipped over Rolja and you cast it off of Helena's ability, you would pay 0 CP, but you'd still have to pay the crystal as part of the alternate cost if you wanted to. This is different from whenever there's an effect that says you can cast something without paying the cost. When you cast it without paying the cost, then you just skip everything, no matter what the cost was, because you're skipping the portion of the casting process where you determine what the cost is and then pay it. So that just gets bypassed entirely. So when you have an effect that says to cast it without paying the cost, then you can get around things like crystals and other parts of the cost. But if we're just reducing by something, you can't reduce the non-CP portions out of it, if that makes sense there. So, all right, I play Reno on my turn, end phase. Then my opponent plays Black Waltz 2, burns my Reno for 4k. I respond by activating special to dull and burn 5k. They respond with discard a Black Mage to do 5 more k. Does Reno's auto ability activate and burn another 4k still? We both die, or... There's a lot going on with this question. And even when I looked at it a little bit earlier and trying to really get what the full situation was, it's confusing. But let's go over what Reno does first, and then we'll get to what the question is and how to answer it. Reno has an auto ability. It says, when an active forward opponent controls becomes dull due to your summon or ability, select up to 2 of the 2 following actions. The first one is to choose a Turk and give it haste. The second one is choose 1 forward, deal it 4,000 damage. All right, so that's the auto ability, right? Whenever an active forward becomes dull, you get that auto ability. Reno also has a special ability that says to choose 1 forward and up to 1 other forward. You dull the former and deal 5,000 damage to the latter. The reason this question is a little confusing is they mentioned Black Waltz 2. This is one of those ones where you can has an action ability. You can discard a Black Mage, deal 5,000 damage to something, but also that particular Black Waltz can, if it's discarded as part of an effect, it can deal 4,000 damage. So I'm a little confused by this question for a couple reasons. One is they mentioned that the Black Waltz deals 4,000, but that's not clear to me if they're saying it was dealing 4,000 because it was discarded and dealing 4,000, or did this Black Waltz discard a different Black Waltz that then triggered the 4k as well? I'm not sure on that. Also, the other thing I'm not sure about is that they say that they play the Reno on their turn, but then they say end phase. I'm not sure if they mean that they ended their turn and then passed it to the opponent, or if they just were trying to move to the attack phase, because they say then my opponent plays Black Waltz, but playing it wouldn't. There's a lot of uncertainty here. Luckily, I can answer this question without knowing all the details of what they're asking. The reason why is because the question itself, what it boils down to, says, does Reno's auto ability activate and burn another 4k? They asked that because they, during whatever this process is, the one thing that is clear is they said that they used Reno's special ability, which is the one that chooses up to 2 forwards and it dulls 1, deals 5,000 damage to the other. 5,000 damage to the other. So they say, is there going to be another 4,000 damage, which is basically asking, is Reno's auto ability going to trigger? The other thing that's clear about this is that in response to dealing the special or activating the special ability, the opponent It says that they burned 5k, so that means there's the bottom of this stack, I don't know what's going on, but the top of this stack has Reno's special ability on it that is not resolved yet, and then it has a 5k damage going to Reno. So what I can tell you is that generally, for an auto ability to resolve, the character with the auto ability needs to be on the field in order for, or not to resolve, I should be clear, for an auto ability to trigger. Sorry, it's getting late. It's like 11:30 right now. For an auto ability to trigger, the character needs to be on the field when the trigger event happens. There are exceptions to this. There are some auto abilities that will say that they trigger in different zones. So if it specifically calls out that it triggers from a different zone, that's fine. But the default is that the auto ability, in order for it to trigger, the character needs to be on the field when the trigger event happens. What is Reno's trigger event? The trigger event for him is when an active forward opponent controls becomes dull due to your summoner ability. Okay. So the thing is, because we have the 5k on the top of the stack here, and then we have Reno's special, remember, abilities do very little when they're put onto the stack. Pretty much everything that an ability or a summon does when they're put onto the stack mostly has to do with just setting up how that's going to resolve later, like making sure that everything's clear about how that effect is going to resolve, but it doesn't actually do anything yet. So nothing has been dulled yet from that special ability. Because of that, this 5,000 damage to Reno, that's going to resolve first, and then Reno, off the field, right? He's been burned. So by the time we get to resolving Reno's ability, it's second on the stack, and Reno has left. Reno's left the building. So it will dull something, but Reno is no longer on the field for the trigger, and he's not going to trigger from the break zone. So the answer to this question is Reno's auto ability will not trigger due to the special ability dulling something, because Reno is no longer on the field because that 5k fried him first. All right, Arden. Arden says if you don't send a character to the break zone, deal that player a point of damage. First question is, what about cards that would send it to the removal area instead of the break zone? Second question is, because Arden's stack creation, does the player select their potential sacrifice? And if the opponent were to, on the stack, kill the target sacrifice with, say, Bahamut to remove it from the game, or if the target character was bounced back to hand. Whew. This whole series of questions for episode 30 here is got a lot of kind of having to untangle the interesting weave of questions going on here. So, Arden, let's read what he does, and then we'll untangle things. His auto ability says, at the beginning of main phase 1 during each player's turn, if that player doesn't put one character they control into the break zone, Arden deals that player 1 point of damage. Okay, so it's an auto ability. When it resolves, the player, whoever's turn it is, makes the decision of whether or not to put a character that they control into the break zone. If they do, then Arden's going to deal that player a point of damage. Or sorry, if they don't put a character in, Arden deals that player 1 point of damage. Okay, cool. So that's how that works. Their question here is, what about cards that would send it to the removal area instead of the break zone? I assume they're talking about the removed from play zone. So it's kind of weird to understand the intent of what they're asking about here, but it's a little bit illuminated by how they ask the next part here, which is that what happens if the player selects their potential sacrifice and the opponent goes on to kill it. So important thing to point out here is that because of the way that this is worded and because of the way the effects resolve, the player is going to decide which character, if any, they're putting in the break zone when Arden is resolving. The reason for that is because by default, almost everything that happens with effects happens when the effect is resolving. There's only 4 things that happen before an effect resolves, that happen when it's going onto the stack. Those 4 things are selecting for multiple actions, choosing targets, assigning different values to different targets, like if we're dividing up damage amongst different targets, and assigning different effects to different targets. So if an effect chooses multiple targets and does different things to each of those targets, we're assigning which target is having which part of the effect go to it. Those are the 4 things that happen when an effect goes on the stack, and that's it. Now, Arden doesn't use the word choose. Because it doesn't use the word choose, it means we're not locking in when this goes on the stack which character we're going to put in the break zone. So if we're not choosing, it's not happening when it goes on the stack. If it's not happening when it goes on the stack, it's going to happen when the effect resolves. So for that reason, there's no opportunity for your opponent to remove the thing that you're choosing to sacrifice to Arden, because when an effect starts resolving, it must resolve completely. You can't interrupt it. Nothing's going to happen in the middle of it. You must resolve it completely before anything else happens. So part of that resolution is deciding which character to put in the break zone. So when you make that decision, your opponent and you don't have any opportunity to do any like response or anything to try to have an impact on that. It's going to resolve completely before anybody else gets to do anything. So to answer that part of it, there's nothing that like the opponent can do to get rid of the card you're going to sacrifice here. Then the other thing is, so it's, what about cards that would send it to the removal? So this is kind of irrelevant, like, because the effect itself puts the character into the break zone. There might be replacement effects like Opus 1 Una or something that's going to take the character, it's going to go into the break zone, and then before it actually hits there, it's going to get removed instead. And that doesn't make a difference for how Arden resolves, because Arden just resolves based off of you deciding to put the character into the break zone. If the character doesn't ultimately end up there, that's not your fault or your opponent's fault. So if a replacement effect causes the character to not go to the break zone after all, I guess if it was like Opus 5 Eldnarsh and like you select to put it in the break zone, but instead it sends it back to your hand, you still did what Arden asked, and you're not going to take the point of damage for it. So ultimately, I think that answers the question there, which is it doesn't matter if it ends up in a different zone than the break zone, as long as you just decided to put it into the break zone, and there's nothing the opponent can do to try to remove your choice, because they won't know what your choice is until it's too late. All right. Last week, I made a ruling regarding Odin triggering from an X-Burst, but I am now doubting if it was correct. Thankfully, this was in a casual setting, and it was not a game changer for the game at hand. Player 1 takes 1 damage, flips over Odin, and triggers the X-Burst. Player 2 has no forwards of cost 2 or less, thus no valid targets. They lean over and ask me if they still get to draw 1 card. I say no, because there are no valid targets for the effect to choose, and that is all encompassed in one effect, essentially, despite being done sequentially, choosing, then breaking, then drawing. However, upon reflection and rereading the effect, the lack of then, as in then draw 1 card, as seen in other cards, makes me doubt if I made the correct ruling. Please help clear up my doubt so I can be a better judge in the future. So, of course, the thing about being a judge is it's very easy to get lost in your own head and to have that anxiety of like, oh, God, I really don't want to get something wrong because I don't want to be the reason why something resolved differently than it's supposed to, right? It's part of the responsibility of being a judge is that it's a double-edged sword. You have the final say on things, but also you have the final say on things, which it means you might get things wrong. And you know what? Honestly, you judge long enough, you are going to get things wrong. I have gotten things wrong, and it sucks. The things that you get wrong will stick with you way longer than the things that you don't get wrong. And if somebody finds out that you got something wrong, then that's going to stick a lot longer in terms of people are going to always be talking about, oh, yeah, that judge ruled this thing this way, which is completely wrong. And that's going to, people are going to discuss that in the community a lot more than they're going to say, oh, yeah, I called the judge over and they got the ruling correct, right? Nobody kind of goes on to Facebook or Discord or whatever group chats and goes, yeah, I called the judge over and they got the ruling correct. And we're going to talk about that. Like, no, it's the default. You expect that. And we all expect that and want it. But anyway, a little bit of a diatribe there. But I think just this question with how long it is and how much the thinking going into it, I totally get it on being like, okay, I ruled this way and I think I'm correct, but also like, what if I wasn't? So the question is about this effect. It says choose one forward of cost 2 or less, break it, draw one card. And they're just going, okay, well, wait, does the draw happen or not? And it's luckily it's one of those basic rules, right? It's the thing where if we already know that if there's no valid target when something resolves, like if there were one or more things chosen, and when you resolve it, all of the targets that were chosen are invalid, the whole thing gets canceled. It just self-cancels. This is slightly different because this isn't about whether things became invalid when it resolved. The thing about X burst is that the whole process happens at the same time, right? It doesn't use the stack, but you go through the entire card without stopping. But that being said, you can't do the effect if you don't have the valid target in the first place. So it's still the same overall result. The person who asked this question, they did get it correct that you don't get the card draw. It doesn't matter whether or not it says then do this. If it's all one effect, then if the effect can't resolve legally, the whole effect is not resolving. And in this case, we're not even getting as far as really resolving it because we just don't have something to choose in the first place. So, yeah, we're not going to get the card draw for this, which, is a bummer if you're the Odin player. You're like, no, I want my card. But yeah, that's the answer to the question. But just kind of getting into the psychology of the whole judging side of it and trying to make sure you get things right. Like I get it. So. Hi, I'm new to the game and have been trying to wrap my head around the gains haste part of this card. If I understand correctly, Balthier's first effect triggers after I declare attackers. Then, assuming I have 5 MBM characters, I can grant another forward haste. But since I've already declared attackers, the haste seems kind of pointless, outside of abilities that require dulling, I suppose. Is there some timing or step I'm missing that allows the newly hasted forward to also attack in the same attack phase? This is the question that I call, tell me that you're a Magic player without telling me that you're a Magic player. Because it totally, if you've played Magic and you've played FFTCG, you totally get why this person is confused here. Balthier has the auto ability. It says, when Balthier attacks, choose one forward. If you control 5 or more category MBM characters, it gains haste until the end of the turn. So the person asking is like, well, wait, that's not helpful because I've already declared my attackers. And so I just gave somebody haste, but by the time it resolves, it's too late. Except that in FFTCG, it's not too late. Why is it not too late? Because in FFTCG, we declare one attacker at a time. Unlike Magic. Magic, you go, these are all my attackers. Deal with them. They all charge forward at the same time. In the case of FFTCG, very true to the roots of the series, we attack one at a time, right? Character goes forward, thwack, and they go back in line. And the next character goes forward, thwack, and they go back in line, right? It's turn-based. Now, turn-based means we have one attacker at a time or one party attacking at a time. I guess in the situation we have one attack at a time, but there's you loop through multiple times until you decide to stop declaring attackers. So that's the reason why this is helpful, is because you attack with Balthier, you give something else haste. After you've resolved whatever happens with Balthier's attack, now you go back to the attack declaration step of the attack phase, and now you can declare that hasted forward as an attacker, if you so choose. So yeah, that's one of those things that if you've been playing FFTCG, for any amount of time, you probably already know that you only attack with one at a time. But if you're a new player and you come from Magic, I totally get why you would be confused by that. All right, trying to build a deck with this card and wanting to make sure it works as I think it does. The question is auto ability will not trigger. Does this only affect the ETB, or does it affect all auto abilities on the card? And if so, is it permanent, as the card doesn't confirm until end of turn? Additionally, if played in a Category 4 deck and attempting to play any of the mentioned cards, which abilities will not trigger, if any? Opus 15 Palom, Opus 15 Porum, and Opus 13 Sophie. So Kater Bashtar here has this auto ability that says when he enters the field, you choose one forward of power 4,000 or less in your break zone, play it onto the field, and the important part here is it says its auto ability will not trigger. If you're an OG like me, you know that we learned this a long time ago because that's the same phrasing as Opus 1 Golbez. Opus 1 Golbez very famously plays a bunch of cards onto the field, and it says their auto abilities will not trigger. So we learned back then what this means, but I totally get that it is not at all intuitive. If you aren't familiar with the Golbez ruling, then seeing this is like, well, wait, what auto ability doesn't trigger? Like, have I just now erased the auto ability off of the forward that I played? Luckily, it's not that bad. Really, what this means is that if the character you're playing, or I guess it's forward in this case, if the forward that you're playing has an auto ability that triggers from an entering the field, that auto ability will not trigger from an entering the field, but that's all that gets stopped by this. Like, there are some auto abilities that trigger from a character entering a field, but also has an alternative trigger event. So it might be when it enters the field or attacks. And in that case, it won't trigger from entering off of Kater's ability here. But if you attack with that character later, it will still trigger. So it's not cutting off that auto ability forever and saying, oh, nope, you don't get to have it because he played it off of his effect. It's simply just saying it won't trigger when it enters the field. It's just like, there's not really like, I guess, a way to phrase that on the card that doesn't become super wordy and kind of clunky to explain that its auto ability will not trigger when it enters the field. But will trigger later. So yeah, it's only like whatever auto ability would trigger due to entering the field. Other auto abilities that trigger from entering the field will still happen, but its own auto ability will not. Now, for the second part of this, Palom has an auto ability that triggers at the end of the turn, so this doesn't affect that. Porum has the same auto ability that triggers at the end of the turn. This effect won't change that at all. And then Sophie has a different auto ability, but it also triggers at the end of the turn. So not going to affect that either. So playing any of those three off of him is not going to mess up the processing of their auto abilities when their trigger events do happen later. It just would stop if they were to trigger when it first entered the field in the first place. But those three specific examples don't trigger off entering the field anyway, so they're safe. All right, if I had an LB card, say Golbez, that was broken during the turn, he would first hit the break zone, then move to the LB deck face up. Would he then be able to be replayed to the field by Rydia? As I understand it, face-up cards in the LB deck cannot be cast, but since it's being played to the field by Rydia's ability, would that resolve to Golbez re-entering the field? Again, this is one of these cute ones where I like people trying to think outside the box or trying to like find little holes in the rules and be like, oh, is that something that's just not obvious? We don't need to know what Golbez does other than the fact that he's an LB card, and so once he leaves the field, he returns back to the LB deck face up. But Rydia has this effect. It says, when Rydia enters the field, choose one forward, put into your break zone from the field during this turn, play it onto the field. So that's pretty straightforward most of the time. You're just playing something that went into the break zone that turn and it comes back. So I get the idea of like, okay, well, the way that LB cards work is that technically the card goes into the destination zone and then gets yeeted back to the LB deck. So it did go to the break zone, right? It does meet the definition of it was a card that went to the break zone from the field. There's a couple reasons why this falls apart though in the rules. And so spoiler alert, unfortunately this combo or this idea won't work, but let's go over why. The first is that even though it's not obvious the way that Rydia's text is worded, Rydia does need to choose a forward that is currently in the break zone. So it says to choose one forward, put in your break zone from the field during this turn. And you might be like, well, it doesn't specify it has to be in the break zone. But it does need to be in the break zone. The reason why comes down to instancing. I've explained this in other videos before. But the thing about this game is that every time a card changes zones, it becomes a different instance of itself. It treats it as being a different copy of the same card, even if the physical card is exactly the same. And the only thing that it really tracks is where it came from. So for example, if I have a card that goes, like in the case of Rydia here, I played, let's not use Golbez, let's use a different example, Kane, right? I played Kane to the field, and when I played it to the field, it entered the field, and it was now Kane number 94, right? We're going to just slap a little number on him. Kane number 94. Thank you for your service. Kane ends up breaking, goes to the break zone. He goes to the break zone, but when he's in the break zone, he's no longer Kane number 94. Now he's Kane number 1138. Okay, well, now you're Kane number 1138. That being said, the game does know that Kane number 1138 came from the field this turn, right? He's not Kane 94, but he is a Kane that came from the field into the break zone this turn. So it contains that information, basically, that Kane 1138 has that information. So that when Rydia chooses Kane 1138 in the break zone, if that resolves, it will play Kane 1138 to the field. And then when Kane 1138 enters the field, he's no longer Kane 1138 either. Now he's entered the field, and now he's Kane 408. Okay, rip it off. Okay, now you're Kane number 408. And we know that he came from the break zone, I guess, for what it's worth. But yeah, the instancing, every time a card changes zones, it's a different instance of the card. So the reason why we have to choose something in the break zone is because if we choose something in a different zone, like if it got removed from play at some point, like Mist Dragon removed it or something, the card no longer carries that information of having originally been on the field and went to the break zone and then got removed from the game, right? We've gone to, like, it doesn't keep track of that many steps, right? It really only keeps track of how did it get to its current zone. But like, yeah, it wouldn't know that Kane originally went field to break zone. So like you couldn't choose it from the remove from play zone anyway, because it wouldn't be valid. It wouldn't be a forward that was put from the field into the break zone that turn. And you're thinking, yes, but physically it did. It was this card. It went into the break zone. The game doesn't see it that way. The game sees it as a different copy of Kane. And that copy of Kane went from the break zone to the remove from play zone, but it became a different instance when it went there. Okay, now it's Kane 831 in the remove from play zone. But it didn't, it as far as the game's concerned, it didn't originally come from the field into the break zone because it's a different instance of the card. It's like it's a completely different copy. Like even like it treats it as if it's like a different physical copy of the card, right? In the same way that if you had multiple physical cards in the same break zone, you would say, well, this card down here didn't actually come from the field because it's a different physical copy. The game treats it that way, essentially. So that doesn't work. And I guess that kind of tied in my other reason, because I was going to give a couple reasons, but I kind of tied in my other reason into it for why you can't choose Golbez by talking about the remove from play thing, because it's the same thing. You just can't choose Golbez in the limit break zone, basically. So, all right, 98% sure this doesn't work. Just getting clarification. Neo Exdeath comes in, breaks 2 backups, and Ignis triggers. Ignis only gets 1 trigger on this interaction, correct? Not 2? Assumption no. Ignis clearly states they only trigger once per turn. So they will only trigger 1, not both backups being sent to the break zone, correct? All right, so what we got going on here is Neo Exdeath has an auto ability. It says when Neo Exdeath enters the field, choose 2 backups you control, remove them, and all the forwards and monsters opponent controls from the game. So Ignis, his auto ability, says when a backup you control is put from the field into the break zone, choose 1 forward in your break zone, add it to your hand. This effect will trigger only during your turn and only once per turn. I'm going to pause for a second to see if you realize what the problem is with this question, just in case you didn't figure it out from me reading it. All right, take that moment, look at those abilities again. All right. So for those of you paying attention, you see that the trigger event for Ignis is when a backup you control is put from the field into the break zone. For Neo Exdeath, the effect says you choose 2 backups you control and you remove them and all the forwards and monsters opponent controls from the game. So the problem here, of course, is that Ignis will not trigger from your backups being removed from the game. Unfortunately. So it doesn't trigger at all, which is like kind of sidestepping the question here. I'll come back to what the actual question is, but it sidesteps it because the situation doesn't exist already, because Ignis's trigger event won't trigger from backups being removed from the game. So womp womp there. But let's talk about the overall concept, right? Let's pretend for a second either that Neo did break the backups, or we can pretend that Ignis's auto ability, the trigger event, is removing them from the game instead, right? So in that situation where these two do match up, then the effect does say it only triggers during your turn, only once per turn. So they said Ignis only gets 1 trigger on this interaction, correct? Which, okay, in our made up version where this does match up, then yes, Ignis would only get 1 trigger, even though they happen at the same time. It would only trigger once. And technically, the Ignis player would get to decide which one of the backups was causing that auto to trigger. It's not important in this situation, but there are other situations where choosing which card triggered the auto is important. The one that comes to mind is the Crystal Bart. Well, okay, not even the Crystal Barts, because we have a new Crystal Barts. The Theater Rhythm Crystal Barts that has an ability where you can pay crystals to replay a Warrior of Light to the field that went to the break zone. If you had, that only triggers once per turn. If you had multiple Warriors of Light go into the break zone at the same time, then Barts would only trigger once, but you would choose which forward it's triggering for, basically, essentially picking which forward is going to get replayed if you pay the crystals. So again, not important here with Ignis, but you do get to decide which one is actually triggering the thing there. But it would only trigger once. And yeah, ultimately this question is flawed from the start, just because Ignis doesn't trigger from them getting removed from the game, but still a learning opportunity, let's say. Oh, Leon. So, okay, the question is, I've been informed that Leon, only one of the conditions have to be met. Why is this, if it makes use of an and? Leon is the most unnecessarily complicated card that you will never see played, basically. I shouldn't say it. I think somebody actually started figuring out at some point, just for funsies, as a rogue jank deck, like doing new stuff with the newer rebels. But it doesn't change the fact that this card is just, it caused way more trouble than it's worth. Why did it cause more trouble than it's worth? Well, I have, this is actually the errata text here. This card was so confusing when it got spoiled, and there were so many questions asked to Hobby Japan on Twitter, that when the set came out, they issued an errata for it already. And I think the only other time I've seen an errata get issued, like when a set came out for a card, was for Opus 8 Charlotta, because her text was even worse than Leon. But what is it with these wind cards that they're like weird text? All right, let me read what the errata version is, and then I'll tell you what the original one is, then I'll tell you how this all resolves. Leon says, when Leon enters a field, if you don't control a card named Maria, and if you don't pay 2 CP, put Leon into the break zone. Okay, the original version of Leon, which is the printed one, because there's actually this image up here. This is the errata version because it's from Square's website, but this doesn't exist in print yet because there hasn't been a reprint of it at some point. So all the printed copies, they read slightly different. They read as, when Leon enters the field, if you don't control... Actually, I'm going to point out the commas here because the commas are hilarious. The original one reads as, when Leon enters the field, comma, if you don't control a card named Maria, comma, if you don't pay 2 CP, comma, put Leon into the break zone. So many commas. And that was confusing because it's worded like a conditional auto ability, but it involves payment, and there was a lot of confusion on whether you needed to control Maria and pay 2 or put Leon in the break zone. Like it did legitimately sound like you needed to both control Leon, or sorry, not Leon, control Maria and pay 2 CP. Otherwise, he's going in the break zone. If either of those things was not true, he was going in the break zone. And so I was like, wow, that's a tall order. Like he costs 2, but then you have to control a different character and you need to pay 2 extra. Like, why is that all necessary? And then when they did the errata, it didn't actually help that much because it still says if you don't control a card named Maria and if you don't pay 2. So it still makes it sound like you need to control Maria and pay the 2. It's awkward. But I can tell you, I can confidently report what they're saying with this card is that the part of it that resolves and puts Leon into the break zone only happens if both of those things didn't happen before, right? We have 2 paths here. You have you control Maria or you have that you pay 2, right? So Leon's auto ability triggers. And the thing I will point out is I did ask on Twitter, I asked Hobby Japan to confirm that Leon's auto ability is a conditional auto ability because it's worded like it. It's in the same phrasing. It's got the if after the comma. So it should be a conditional auto. And they said yes, which is important for how this resolves. When Leon enters the field, what's going to happen is it triggers and it checks the condition right away to see if it even goes on the stack. So it's going to check, and it's going to check, do you control Maria? So if you played Leon and you control Maria, then that means that the condition is false because both those things have to be true for the God, this is so hard to talk about without being confusing. Both not controlling Maria and not paying the 2 need to happen for this to be, for the condition to be true. So if you control Maria, then right away the condition is not true, and that means the auto ability won't even go on this. It won't even trigger. It won't go on the stack because the trigger event is false, or the trigger condition is false. Okay, so if you control Maria when Leon enters, you're done. Nothing happens. If you don't control Maria when Leon enters the field, the auto ability triggers. It goes on the stack. And then we have to wait till it resolves. And then when it resolves, it's going to check. It says, do you control Maria? And it's possible, maybe you did something so that between when it triggered and when it resolved, maybe a Maria entered your field. Stranger things have happened, right? Maybe you cast a Phoenix, boom, we have a Maria on the field. When it resolves, if Maria's on the field, we're done. We're done. Like Leon, not going to break. Cool. When it resolves, if you still don't control a Maria, then then you choose at that point whether you're paying 2 or not. And if you don't pay the 2, we resolve it by putting Leon into the break zone. If you do pay the 2, then the condition is now false when it's being checked again, and then the auto ability doesn't resolve because the condition is false because you did pay the 2. And now Leon gets to stay. So you essentially paid 4 for Leon, but you paid it in sets of 2. The important thing here is that because it's conditional ability, or conditional auto ability, that if you controlled Maria in the first place, it doesn't matter if they like remove Maria before the auto ability would have resolved. Because like I said, if the condition was false when it triggered, it's never going to go onto the stack. So if you control Maria and you cast Leon, you can safely work under the assumption that you will not have to pay the 2 for Leon because there's no auto to force you to do it. So yeah, the overall question here is, why is this if it makes use of an and? Well, it's because the whole ability was just worded awkwardly, and I love the fact that they errated it, but it didn't really make it any clearer. And like grammatically, yes, there's a way to read this the way that it is now, the errated version, where you get that like the condition is both things being true at the same time, or false, right? Depending how you look at it. like that the condition is, are both of these things united in being the way that it's described, but it's also possible to read it the other way. So like I said, the biggest pain in the butt common 2CP forward that you're probably never going to see got an errata. I hope he does get a reprint, just so we get the reprinted version. That's a, like, I don't know, anniversary 2027. Give us an errata Leon. I don't know. It's midnight now. This is amusing me. That leads us to our last question, which is more complicated than Leon, but we've done it. We've reached the end of 20 questions here. So I talked about Eldnarsh earlier in the evening, and that was a little bit of foreshadowing, I guess, because here we are with Eldnarsh and his friend Necron. The question is, if my opponent is at 6 damage, I have Necron and 3 darks on the field. If I use Eldnarsh's S ability, ending my turn deals my opponent a point of damage from Necron, making it 7. If I was to go straight to end phase, following the phases through and keeping my Necron and 3 darks on the field, would Eldnarsh's effect, making it a game loss immediately so that Necron does not deal the final point of damage to my opponent, would it be a double loss? Or would I be able to get Necron to go first to deal the 7th damage, and then my opponent would lose immediately before I get the game loss from Eldnarsh? Or would it just circle back to the first suggestion of a double loss? This is a complicated one. Let me read the abilities first, and then we'll kind of get into what this all touches on. So Eldnarsh has a special ability called Paradise. It reads as, take one more turn after this one. At the end of that turn, you lose the game. That's a big swing. So you get another turn, but at the end of that turn, you lose the game. I will point out, that's an auto ability, a delayed auto ability that says at the end of that turn, you lose the game. Delayed auto ability. That's going to be important later. Necron has an auto ability at the bottom of his card that says, at the end of each of your turns, if you control 3 or more dark characters, Necron deals your opponent 1 point of damage. Now, I think the way they asked this question, they kind of messed up the question a little bit, because they mentioned using the S ability, but they also mentioned ending their first turn before the extra turn and dealing damage from Necron to make it 7. I think their intention with this question is to ask about that 7th damage coming on the extra turn, because otherwise it's this whole Eldnarsh thing is irrelevant, right? If you end your turn and Necron deals the 7th point of damage, like, it doesn't really matter whether you used Paradise or not. So I'm going to work under the assumption that they were saying that I think the end of this first turn is the 6th point of damage, and then they're trying to deal the 7th with the extra turn from Eldnarsh. That seems to be what their question is, so that's the question I'm going to answer. Also, it's just kind of the more interesting one. Otherwise the answer is, well, it's irrelevant. Necron dealt 7 point of damage. We're done. So, in this situation where the person reaches the end of their turn, they have already used Paradise earlier that turn, and at the end of their turn, Necron deals a point of damage. Their opponent goes to 6. Now they take this extra turn from Eldnarsh. They said that they just pass through it, right? So let's assume that neither player does any actions. We just skip right to the end phase. We go to the end phase. What's going to happen? We have 2 auto abilities. One of these auto abilities is going to deal a 7th point of damage to the opponent. The other auto ability is going to make you lose. So do we have a double loss, or do we not have a double loss? As I pointed out, Eldnarsh's Paradise is a delayed auto ability. The thing about auto abilities, all abilities, is that unless it's an X burst, it has to go on the stack and resolve for it to do anything. Like, effects don't do anything when they go on the stack. They don't, like, we have to make choices about them, but they don't actually do anything when they go on the stack. They do their things when they resolve. Otherwise, they don't do their thing. So, as the player, the Eldnarsh Necron player, when we go to the end phase triggers Necron's ability, because it says at the end of each of your turns, and the Eldnarsh special, the delayed auto, triggers because it says at the end of that turn, and we're now at the end of that turn. So both auto abilities trigger at the same time. We know that the rule about auto abilities going on the stack at the same time is that the turn player puts their autos on the stack in whatever order they like, and the non-turn player does the same thing. In this situation, as described, the non-turn player doesn't have any auto abilities, so simple there. But the turn player gets to decide, do they want to put the Paradise auto on the bottom and then put Necron on top, or do they want to put the Necron on first on the bottom and then put Paradise on top? Which order here? And then the question is, does that matter? Does the order matter? Because I think what they're worried about is they're worried about if they put Necron on top, it's going to resolve. It's going to deal the 7th point of damage, but then also Eldnarsh is going to resolve and it's going to make you lose. And so they think it's a double loss because the opponent took 7 points of damage, but Eldnarsh made you lose. Here's how it works. The thing is, to lose the game, losing the game is always, I shouldn't say always, except for when you concede. Because as a reminder, you are allowed to concede at any point in time. And if you concede, the game's over. But outside of conceding, the way that a player loses is because of rule processes. Rule processes get checked right before a player gains priority and also right after damage is dealt. Those are the times where rule processes got checked. And rule processes are checking for a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to go over the full list right now, but one of those things they're checking for is if a player has received 7 points of damage, and they also check for if the player tried to, since the last priority, if they either tried to draw a card or take damage from a deck that had no cards in it, right? So those are the three main things there, that if those things happen, rule processes says that player loses and then the game's over. So what happens here is, let's see, how do I want to describe this? So if we resolve Necron first, what's going to happen is that Necron is going to deal that 7th point of damage. We deal that 7th point of damage, and then I mentioned that one of the times that rule processes get checked is after damage is dealt. So after that damage is dealt by Necron, we're going to check rule processes, and then guess what? They go, hey, you got dealt 7 points of damage. You lose the game. And when rule processes end the game like that, the game is over. It doesn't matter if anything else was pending. We're not going to like finish resolving what else is left. Like the game, it's done, right? Like to the extent that if that 7 point of damage caused an X burst, you don't even do the X burst, right? Because you check the rule process list before the X burst would even happen. So basically, the Necron's going to deal that 7th point of damage. We're going to check rule processes, see that they have 7 points of damage, and then the game's over. Eldnarsh's auto ability never resolves. Because it never resolves, it never makes you lose. So that's fun. So yeah, if you do things that way, then you're going to avoid losing due to Paradise. If you did it the other way around, unfortunately, then you're going to resolve Paradise first, and then you're going to lose. So I guess in the middle of describing that, I realized that Eldnarsh, this effect making you lose, actually is another way other than conceding that you will lose the game without rule processes, because in this case, it's actually the effect itself that says you lose. So in resolving it, you've lost even without going to rule processes afterward. So that's a fun little workaround there. But yeah, so long way to describe that if you do this and you stack the Necron to resolve first, you win, and you get away with sneakiness, right? Paradise never catches up with you, so you outrun death. Good for you. And that's the end of our questions. That's the end of our 20 questions. So I know it's a little rambly at times, so I hope that was still entertaining and educating and all that. Despite all that, it's now after midnight for me here. But thank you for being here for this. Thank you for being part of this 30th episode of Rules Roundup. Thank you for being a viewer and just watching things in general. I hope if you're not subscribed, then go subscribe to me. All the information for me is down there, right? You see the YouTube. You're on YouTube. If you're watching me, you're on YouTube. I'm not sharing this anywhere else, right? I guess on Twitter, it keeps you on there. It doesn't actually take you to YouTube. So maybe if you're watching me on Twitter, then you're not on YouTube. But YouTube, You can find me there where I am at Judge Jared. That's my page, or not page, channel. On Discord, you can reach out to me where I am Judge Jared. My DMs are open if you have any questions about anything or you just want to share thoughts, as long as you're not sharing thoughts I don't want to hear about. So I keep saying my DMs are open until somebody makes me regret that decision. Please don't be that person to make me regret that decision. You can find me on Facebook, where my page is facebook.com/Judge Jared. You can like my page there and follow it. And then on Twitter, I am at Judge Jared FFTCG. You can follow me there and see me tweet at Hobby Japan and go, why are the rules this way? Or explain to me what is the rule here, because this makes no sense. So you can find me in all 4 of those places. And yeah, this has been long enough. I don't need to really ramble anymore. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Again, thank you to everybody for 300 subscribers on YouTube. I'm blown away. Thank you for that, for being a part of this. Yeah, I hopefully will have another video out without too much of a delay. I'm trying to get back on track with things, but doing my best here. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Judge Jared, and until next time, court is adjourned.